RWBY Neverfell is a version of RWBY's story where Beacon never fell. The story progresses as more and more villains descend on the school, while our protagonists fight them off for as long as it takes. This idea was originally going to be a comic series, but as with most of my fan comic projects, I kinda bailed on it after a while. I still do want to try to finish the series. Unlike most of my fan comics, Neverfell is primarily a slice-of-life dark comedy, and the things that made it most enjoyable to work on aren't things I can just spell out in a video. I don't have the acting skills to roleplay the jokes and dialogue for you, unfortunately. So recently, I thought, just to get at least half of this concept out into the universe, I might do a series of videos to explain how I rewrote the characters to fit this new format, and how I tried to develop them in an actually satisfying way. And I've decided to start with the one I changed the most, Professor Ozpin. I'm gonna admit something that you don't hear from many RWBY critics. In the canon show, I never really liked Ozpin. Even after the Lost Fable episode, I bought into the Ozpin hate and fully believed that the other characters were justified in being angry with him. In my defense, though, from the very beginning, I was convinced that the little hinty hints throughout the series about Ozpin being a shady guy were justified, and actually leading up to something. I mean, untrustworthy authority characters are a staple of young adult media. They're extremely common, and it's really not hard to write them at all. And in my opinion, that was the only aspect of Ozpin's character that was at all interesting. To this day, even, the only reason the other characters care about Ozpin is because of the little lies he's told and the secrets he may still be keeping. If you take that away, there's no reason for him to even stay in the show any longer. So yeah, I was very convinced that the writers were going to make all the build-up around him pay off, to the point of ignoring his suffering during his backstory, and joining Team RWBY and focusing solely on the fact that he never told them that Salem was immortal, which I still think was stupid on his part, but I'll get back to that later. Anyway, I really wanted him to be the bad guy because it was interesting, it was fun, and it made Ozpin an actually compelling character. I was sure that having the heroes finally lash out at him in Volume 6 was the beginning of something big, and that we were soon going to be seeing more of his true colors, and how little regard he actually has for the lives of his students, as long as he can use them to accomplish his goals. But instead, it turned out that the Lost Fable was supposed to be the payoff. The backstory reveal wasn't supposed to be used to develop Ozpin further as a character, or change the way the other characters interact with him. It was just to give everyone a simple, easy reason to not like him anymore. The book was closed on the mystery, and Oz was permanently redefined as this suspicious background entity that people just growl about every once in a while. And when I finally realized that was all we were going to get, I lost all interest in his character. Then along came Neverfell, a setting where Ozpin was still alive, and Salem was coming to Beacon specifically to target him. All of a sudden, I needed to care about this character again, and come up with a reason for him to matter. So I did this by fulfilling my original wish, by making Ozpin a self-centered megalomaniac who says inspiring things and acts like he means well, but has secretly taught himself to view everyone around him as disposable puppets, and even to enjoy manipulating them just to see what he can get away with. Essentially, this is what I used to think was the best explanation for him telling the cast that Salem exists without telling them that she's immortal. Yes, they will most likely give up their lives in vain trying to fight against her and her forces, striving towards a final confrontation that can only end with their deaths because it will never end with hers. But Oz just doesn't care. As long as he gets what he wants, a steady supply of young, impressionable warriors to throw at his enemy, he doesn't care how they might feel about potentially fighting for nothing, and finds it more convenient to not tell them. Of course, if he were as kind at heart as he seems to be in the canon, I think it would make more sense for him to just tell the truth to everyone in his inner circle. Let his chosen few know that the forces of evil have stood for so long, because the leader of those forces is literally unkillable, and ask them to help him find some other way to defeat her, and protect the people of Remnant while they look for that solution. Instead, Ozpin essentially just assumes that the status quo is permanent, and proceeds to make sure no one else is allowed to come up with alternatives because they simply don't know that they need to. How many possible solutions could Atlas have come up with, for instance, if its scientists and inventors were aware that Salem's immortality was a problem they needed to solve? Instead, Oz sits back and watches as Ironwood pours military funding into robot soldiers and bigger guns that ultimately won't accomplish anything. He just refuses to give the world a chance to save itself from her, and I've never seen anyone address how short-sighted that is. Team RWBY and friends may have treated him horribly after hearing the Lost Fable, and definitely crossed the line by taking out their frustrations on Oscar, but I still think Ozpin should have told them and his other allies about what Salem actually is. If he's going to allow people to risk their lives fighting for him, he should recognize their right to know what they're up against. And maybe if he had done the responsible thing and given them the info they needed, the mostly unneeded, traumatic backstory wouldn't have come out in the first place. Anyway, getting back on topic, in Neverfell, Ozpin's character reaches a turning point when he chooses on his own to tell the lost fable to his inner circle. Basically, they're starting to get suspicious towards him, and since Salem's army is already on his doorstep, he feels like he doesn't really have anything to lose. After all, with the Grimm swarming the school, it's not like they can refuse to fight for him. So he tells them the truth about himself and Salem, and since this story is coming from him, it makes more sense that he adds in details about how he first met the girl in the tower, and their daughters and the life they had together. Jin just throws these things in unnecessarily, even though she's a third party who shouldn't care. But for Ozpin himself, they're all part of his lived experience. Of course he might feel they're relevant and want to talk about them. At the end of his story, he admits that he doesn't know how to defeat Salem and may not even want to. He does think it's ultimately beneficial for him to create secret societies of people who know about her and can foil her plans. But he mostly just uses them to spy on her so he'll know if she's planning to move against him, and to support his own position of power. He doesn't really have any concrete plans beyond that. Once he finishes explaining this, everyone is shocked as you'd expect, but in the end they all draw different conclusions about what they've heard. Unlike with Team RWBY and Juniper's unified hive mind reaction, I want it to be clear that this event is supposed to affect Ozpin's relationships with his current and former followers. It's not mere justification for a morally gray character label. In fact, this is a huge catalyst for character development among all the members of his inner circle, which I'll probably explain in future videos. This is also a huge catalyst for Ozpin himself, because now this version of his character really starts to diverge from the canon. There's no more secret backstory for him to keep, and no more secret society for him to order around. He's left with just two options: either stay at Beacon and eventually come face to face with Salem, or run away from the plot and leave everyone to fend for themselves. And he's actually leaning towards the second option until Glinda convinces him to stay. She has faith that he can become the inspirational leader he's always pretended to be if he actually tries. And the rest of his character development revolves around this idea. I've already written a lot about how I plan to go about this, and there's some links in the description to some Tumblr posts where I explain it all. But in a nutshell, the fact that Ozpin no longer has anything to distract him from actually running his school and paying attention to his students gives him opportunities to grow and learn from them, particularly Oscar Pine, who is one of his new students in this AU. Essentially, he and Oscar are opposites. Oz is callous and jaded and generally doesn't care that much about anyone who can't be useful to him. But Oscar is kind and sensitive and genuinely wants to help others. When Oscar goes to him for advice, Ozpin is actually forced to consider that way of thinking, especially when he makes insensitive comments that Oscar rightfully calls him out for. They have a dynamic that adds dimensions to both characters, prompting Oscar to become more assertive and Ozpin to become more vulnerable. Vulnerability is the name of the game with Ozpin. I think the key to making him a better leader and a nicer person is to break down the emotional walls, get him to allow himself to care and be cared for, teaching him that even though valuing the people around you can be harder than treating them like inanimate objects, it's more rewarding in the end, and will make it possible for them to also value you, to develop real trust in you, instead of needing to be carefully controlled by a web of lies. And this character arc ends with Oz being able to reconnect with his children, who are also characters in this AU, after the thousands of years they've been apart. He starts the story as someone who's not even much of an ally, let alone a friend, and by the end he has the potential to be a decent father, someone who can take responsibility for others and help them with their struggles as they grow. And this progression was really fun to work on, especially for a character that most people, the actual writers included, see more as a plot device than an actual person in the RWBY universe. Anyway, thank you for watching, like, subscribe, whatever, and check out my Coffee page gallery to see the finished pictures in these videos. Till next time!